Captain Zexthera of the Galactic Trade Federation had seen many things in his 43 cycles of life. He had witnessed the crystalline cities of Vorthak Prime, negotiated with the hive minds of the Zephyrian Collective, and even survived a pirate attack near the lawless Omega Sector. But nothing had prepared him for the sight before him now. His magnificent starship, the Quantum Echo, lay broken and smoking on the dusty surface of a backwater planet called Earth. The ship's quantum drive had failed catastrophically during what should have been a routine hyperspace jump, forcing an emergency landing in what the locals called Nevada. The crash had damaged critical systems throughout the vessel, and, worse yet, it had attracted the attention of the primitive beings who inhabited this world. Humans, they called themselves. Bipedal creatures with soft skin and no natural armor, lacking any apparent psychic abilities or advanced technology. According to the galactic databases, they had barely achieved basic spaceflight and were considered one of the least developed species in this spiral arm of the galaxy. The Federation had classified them as harmless but primitive and generally avoided contact. Now, as Zexthera stood beside his crippled ship, a small crowd of these humans had gathered at what they maintained was a safe distance of several hundred meters. They pointed strange rectangular devices at him and his vessel, chattering excitedly in their crude language. His universal translator struggled to make sense of their rapid, emotional speech patterns. Among the crowd, one figure caught his attention, a young human, smaller than the others, with an unruly mop of dark hair and clothes stained with various substances. Unlike the others who maintained their distance, this one moved closer, seemingly unafraid of the massive alien ship or its equally imposing captain. Zexthera stood nearly 3 meters tall, his scaled hide gleaming purple-black in the harsh desert sun. His 4 arms moved independently as he assessed the damage to his ship, while his tail lashed with frustration behind him. The human child, for surely this small being was a juvenile, approached within 20 meters before stopping. "Wow," the human said, its voice high-pitched but clear through the translator. "That's one heck of a spaceship. What happened to it?" Zexthera turned his 6 eyes toward the creature, studying it with curiosity. The human appeared to be what his species would consider an adolescent, perhaps 14 or 15 years by human standards. Its gender was difficult to determine, but the translator suggested male inflection patterns. "The quantum resonance chamber experienced a cascade failure," Zexthera replied, his own voice a deep rumble that made the ground vibrate slightly. "The hyperdrive matrices became unstable, forcing an emergency translation to normal space above your world." The human's eyes, only 2 of them, Zexthera noted with some pity, widened with what appeared to be understanding rather than confusion. This surprised the captain considerably. "So basically your faster-than-light drive broke, and you crashed," the human said, nodding. "That sucks. Can you fix it?" The directness of the question startled Zexthera. In galactic society, such casual inquiry about advanced technology from a primitive species would be considered laughably presumptuous. Yet something in the human's tone suggested genuine interest rather than mockery. "The damage is extensive," Zexthera admitted, gesturing with 2 of his arms toward the ship's hull. "The quantum field generators are cracked, the antimatter containment system is operating at 30% efficiency, and the navigation computer has suffered memory core fragmentation. Even if I had access to proper repair facilities, it would take several cycles to restore full functionality." The human stepped closer, peering at the ship with obvious fascination. "Mind if I take a look? I'm pretty good with fixing things." This statement caused Zexthera to emit what his species considered laughter, a sound like grinding stone that made nearby humans step back in alarm. The idea that this primitive creature could comprehend, let alone repair, technology that represented millions of years of galactic advancement was absurd beyond measure. "You," Zexthera rumbled, amusement clear in his tone. "Child of Earth, your species has barely mastered combustion engines and basic electronics. This vessel incorporates technologies your people will not discover for millennia, assuming they survive long enough to advance beyond their current primitive state. Rather than being offended, the humans seemed to consider this statement with surprising calm. Maybe, he said finally, but broken is broken, right? I mean, whether the car engine or a quantum whatever you called it, stuff breaks in pretty predictable ways. Things get hot when they shouldn't, connections come loose, parts wear out, or get damaged. The principles are probably similar, even if the scale is different. The simplicity of this observation, combined with the human's complete lack of intimidation, intrigued Zexthera despite himself. He had spent the last several hours running diagnostic routines and contemplating the impossibility of his situation. His ship's distress beacon was damaged, his communication array was offline, and even if he could contact the Federation, a rescue mission to this remote world would take months to organize. Very well, Zexthera said, making what he would later recognize as a decision that would change both their lives. I challenge you, young human. If you can identify even one actual problem with my ship's systems, not obvious external damage, but an actual technical malfunction, I will consider the possibility that your species possesses some small measure of mechanical aptitude. The human grinned, an expression that Zexthera's cultural database identified as indicating pleasure or confidence. And if I can actually fix something? Impossible, Zexthera declared. But if by some miracle you could repair any component of this vessel, I would be forced to revise my entire understanding of human capability. Deal, the human said, extending one small hand toward the towering alien captain. I'm Jake, by the way. Jake Morrison. Zexthera looked down at the offered appendage, recognizing it as some form of greeting ritual. He carefully extended one massive clawed hand and briefly touched the human's palm, careful not to apply enough pressure to cause injury. I am Captain Zexthera of the Galactic Trade Federation, he rumbled formally. And you, Jake Morrison of Earth, are about to discover why your species remains confined to a single world while others traverse the galaxy. Jake's grin widened. We'll see about that. Now, can you show me where these quantum thingies are located? As Zexthera led the human teenager toward his damaged ship, he reflected on the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a decorated captain with decades of experience in space, about to humor the repair efforts of a primitive child. The other humans continued to watch from their distant positions, occasionally shouting questions or warnings that Jake ignored completely. The ship's main hatch had been damaged in the crash, leaving it partially open and accessible. Zexthera ducked through the opening, his large frame barely fitting through the doorway designed for his species. Jake followed behind and immediately began examining his surroundings with obvious fascination. The interior of the Quantum Echo was a masterpiece of engineering, with surfaces that seemed to flow like liquid metal and displays that projected information directly into three-dimensional space. Crystalline components hummed with barely contained energy, while various mechanical systems moved with the precision of organisms that had evolved for their specific functions. This is incredible, Jake breathed, running his hand along a wall panel that responded to his touch by shifting color. How does this stuff even work? Each system is integrated with quantum-level processors that manipulate matter and energy at the subatomic level, Zexthera explained, watching the humans' reactions carefully. The ship's consciousness coordinates thousands of simultaneous processes while maintaining quantum coherence across multiple dimensional frameworks. To his surprise, Jake nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. So, it's like a really, really advanced computer that controls everything, and it has to keep all the quantum particles in sync or the whole system falls apart. The accuracy of this oversimplification startled Zexthera. While crude, Jake's interpretation captured the essential concept behind quantum coherent technology. That is not entirely incorrect, he admitted reluctantly. Jake was already moving deeper into the ship, his eyes scanning the various systems with obvious intelligence. He paused beside a section where several crystalline components flickered erratically, their usual steady glow interrupted by random pulses. These are having problems, Jake observed, pointing at the malfunctioning crystals. They're supposed to glow steadily, right? But they're flickering like a bad fluorescent bulb. Zextera moved beside the human, examining the quantum resonance array that Jake had identified. Indeed, several of the crystals showed signs of harmonic instability, their quantum fields fluctuating in ways that indicated potential cascade failure. How did you know these were malfunctioning? Zextera asked, genuinely curious. Jake shrugged. Pattern recognition, I guess. Most of the other glowing things in here have a steady light, so the flickering ones obviously aren't working right. Plus, you can hear it. Hear what? The humming. Most of your ship has this low, steady hum, but this section sounds off, like an engine that's misfiring. Jake moved closer to the crystals, tilting his head as if listening. There's an irregular vibration, and if I had to guess, it's probably causing problems with whatever these things are supposed to do. The human was correct on every point. The quantum resonance array's harmonic frequency had indeed been disrupted, causing the exact symptoms Jake had identified. What disturbed Zextera was how quickly the teenager had reached this conclusion using nothing more than basic observation and intuitive reasoning. Can you fix it? Zextera asked, the words escaping before he could stop them. Jake studied the crystalline array thoughtfully. Maybe. What exactly do these crystals do, and how are they supposed to be connected? Against his better judgment, Zextera found himself explaining the basic principles of quantum resonance technology to a human teenager in the middle of the Nevada desert. And, even more disturbing, Jake seemed to understand. 2 hours later, Zextera watched in growing amazement as Jake Morrison worked with tools that should have been impossible for human hands to operate. The teenager had spent the first 30 minutes simply observing the quantum resonance array, asking questions that demonstrated an intuitive grasp of complex physical principles that most galactic species took decades to master. So these crystals create some kind of field that keeps particles aligned across multiple dimensions, Jake said, carefully manipulating a quantum calibrator with makeshift extensions he had crafted from materials found around the ship. And when they get out of sync, the whole system becomes unstable. Correct, Zextera replied, no longer bothering to hide his fascination. But the calibration process requires precise harmonic adjustments measured in fractions of quantum wavelengths. The slightest error could cause a catastrophic cascade failure that would destroy not just the drive system, but potentially the entire ship. Jake paused in his work, looking up at the towering alien captain. So no pressure then. The human's casual attitude toward such enormous stakes both terrified and impressed Zextera. In galactic society, quantum drive repair was performed only by master technicians with decades of training and certification from multiple authority bodies. The idea of allowing an untrained primitive to attempt such delicate work violated every protocol in the Federation handbook. Yet Jake had already identified 3 separate problems that Zextera's own diagnostic systems had missed. The human possessed an uncanny ability to recognize patterns and relationships that weren't immediately obvious, as if his brain naturally processed information in ways that complemented advanced technology. There, Jake announced, making a final adjustment to one of the resonance crystals. Try running your diagnostic now. Zextera activated the ship's internal sensors, expecting to see minimal improvement at best. Instead, the quantum coherence readings showed a dramatic stabilization across the entire array. The flickering crystals now glowed with steady, synchronized light, their harmonic frequencies locked in perfect unity. Impossible, Zextera breathed, running the diagnostic sequence 3 more times to confirm the results. The quantum resonance efficiency has improved by 47%. How did you achieve this level of calibration without proper instruments? Jake grinned and held up a small device he had constructed from various components found around the ship. I made a resonance detector using parts from your entertainment system and some kind of sensor array I found in storage. It's basically a really sensitive frequency counter that can measure tiny variations in the crystal vibrations. Zextera examined the crude device, his scientific mind reeling at the implications. Jake had taken components designed for completely different purposes and reconfigured them into a functional diagnostic tool. More impressive still, he had done so without any understanding of their original design principles, working purely from observed behavior and intuitive engineering. The entertainment system components were never designed to interface with quantum measurement systems, Zexteros said slowly. The frequency ranges don't overlap, the power requirements are incompatible, and the signal processing protocols are completely different. Yeah, I had to build some converter circuits to make it work, Jake replied casually, as if creating impossible technological bridges was a routine task. The tricky part was figuring out how to filter out all the background quantum noise. Your ship generates a lot of interference. The human had not only identified a fundamental engineering challenge, but had solved it using principles that Federation technicians would have required months to develop. Zexteros found himself looking at Jake Morrison with entirely new eyes. "Show me what else you have observed," Zexteros commanded, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. Jake led him through the ship, pointing out various systems and explaining his analysis with growing confidence. He had identified a coolant leak in the antimatter containment system that the ship's own diagnostics had classified as within acceptable parameters. He had discovered a loose connection in the navigation computer's memory core that was causing random data corruption. Most remarkably, he had developed theories about the relationships between different systems that demonstrated a deep understanding of the ship's integrated design. "Your artificial intelligence is having problems too," Jake said as they reached the ship's central processing core. "It's not broken exactly, but it's confused, like it's trying to run too many processes at once, and can't keep track of what's important." Zexteros stared at the human teenager in shock. The ship's AI consciousness was one of the most sophisticated constructs in Federation technology, capable of processing billions of calculations simultaneously while maintaining full awareness of its environment. The idea that a primitive human could diagnose problems with such a complex system was beyond belief. The AI system operates on quantum neural networks that interface directly with the ship's consciousness matrix, Zexteros explained carefully. It exists in multiple dimensional states simultaneously and processes information using cognitive frameworks that most organic minds cannot even comprehend. Jake nodded thoughtfully. "Right, but it's still basically a computer, just a really advanced one. And computers have the same basic problems whether they're running on silicon chips or quantum whatever. They get overwhelmed when too many things are demanding attention at once." The human moved to one of the AI interface panels, studying the flowing patterns of light that indicated the system's current state. "Look at this," he said, pointing to areas where the patterns seemed chaotic or conflicted. "Your AI is trying to manage emergency protocols, damage assessment, repair prioritization, and normal operations all at the same time. It's like trying to think about 4 different conversations while someone is screaming in your ear." The accuracy of this assessment stunned Zexteros. The ship's AI had indeed been struggling since the crash, its decision-making processes slowed by competing priority demands. Federation protocol called for a complete system reset, which would take days to complete and require specialized equipment they didn't have. The solution would require restructuring the AI's priority queues and isolating non-essential processes, Zexteros said. But such modifications demand access to core programming levels that are protected by quantum encryption. Even Federation technicians require special authorization codes to make such changes. Jake was already examining the interface panels, his fingers tracing the patterns of light with obvious fascination. What if we don't try to change the core programming? What if we just give it some breathing room by handling some of the simpler tasks ourselves? Explain. Well, right now your AI is trying to monitor and control everything on the ship, right? But some of those tasks are pretty basic. What if we set up some kind of automated systems to handle the routine stuff, freeing up the AI to focus on the important problems? The concept was so simple that Zexteros initially dismissed it as primitive thinking. Advanced AI systems were designed to handle multiple complex tasks specifically because organic minds couldn't match their processing speed or accuracy. The idea of reducing an AI's workload by adding simpler systems seemed counterintuitive. But as Jake began explaining his reasoning in more detail, Zextra realized the human had identified a fundamental flaw in Federation design philosophy. Their technology had become so complex that it often created its own problems, with advanced systems struggling under the burden of managing every possible variable. You propose creating subsidiary control systems that operate independently of the main AI? Zextra asked. Exactly. Think of it like having assistants. The AI is the boss trying to do everything himself, but if we give him some reliable helpers to handle the basic stuff, he can focus on the complicated decisions. Jake had already begun implementing his plan, connecting various ship systems in ways that Zextra had never considered. Using components from the environmental controls, navigation backup systems, and even the food preparation units, the human was constructing a network of simple automated processes that could handle routine maintenance tasks. The work required a level of creative thinking that impressed Zextra enormously. Jake didn't just understand how individual systems worked. He could envision how they might work together in entirely new configurations. Each connection he made was elegant in its simplicity, using existing capabilities in ways their original designers had never intended. There, Jake announced after another hour of work. Try activating your AI interface now. Zextra accessed the ship's consciousness through his neural implant, expecting minimal improvement. Instead, he found the AI's responses dramatically faster and more coherent. The consciousness seemed calmer, more focused, as if a great weight had been lifted from its processing cores. Efficiency has improved by 63%, the AI reported in its crystalline voice. Cognitive load reduced to manageable levels. Creative problem-solving capabilities restored to full functionality. How was this improvement achieved? Zextra looked at Jake Morrison, this human teenager who had just accomplished what Federation engineers would have considered impossible, and realized that everything he thought he knew about primitive species was fundamentally wrong. The human implemented distributed task management protocols using improvised hardware interfaces, Zextra replied to the AI. He created auxiliary control systems that operate independently while reporting status to primary consciousness. Remarkable. Such innovation demonstrates advanced understanding of integrated system architecture. Recommend immediate communication with Federation Technical Authority regarding human cognitive capabilities. Jake was already moving on to the next problem, apparently unaware that he had just revolutionized galactic understanding of artificial intelligence design. He was examining the antimatter containment system with the same casual confidence he had shown with every other challenge. This coolant leak is going to be a bigger problem, Jake said, pointing to readings that showed steadily increasing temperature levels. If the containment field fails, we're going to have a really bad day. Zextra felt a chill of fear run through his scaled hide. Antimatter containment failure would create an explosion that could destroy everything within a 50-kilometer radius, including several human population centers. The situation was far more dangerous than he had initially realized. The resolution, the antimatter containment chamber hummed ominously in the depths of the quantum echo, its crystalline walls flickering with barely contained energy that could annihilate matter itself. Jake Morrison stood before the massive structure, studying its design with the same calm focus he had brought to every other challenge, while Captain Zextra watched with growing anxiety. The magnetic field generators are failing, Jake observed, pointing to several components that sparked intermittently. And that coolant leak is causing thermal expansion in the containment matrix. If the field collapses completely, the antimatter will come into contact with normal matter, creating an explosion equivalent to several nuclear weapons, Zextra finished grimly. My people have protocols for such situations, but they involve evacuating all personnel to a safe distance of at least 100 kilometers. Jake glanced toward the ship's exit, where the crowd of human observers still maintained their distant watch. That would include about 500,000 people in Las Vegas, plus everyone in the smaller towns around here. Not really an option. The casual way the human discussed such enormous stakes continued to amaze Zexthara. Most Federation citizens would be paralyzed by fear when confronted with antimatter containment failure. Yet this teenager seemed to view it as simply another engineering problem to solve. The magnetic field generators require replacement components that exist only in advanced Federation facilities, Zexthara explained. And even if such parts were available, the installation process demands specialized equipment and certified technicians. The margin for error is essentially zero. Jake was already examining the failing generators, using his improvised diagnostic tools to measure field strength and stability. What if we don't try to fix the original system? What if we build a completely new containment field using different principles? Impossible. Antimatter containment requires precise magnetic field configurations that must be maintained at specific frequencies and power levels. The slightest variation would result in catastrophic failure. Maybe with your technology, Jake replied, his mind clearly working through possibilities that Zexthara couldn't imagine. But what about using multiple smaller fields instead of one big one? Like having several backup systems that can take over if the primary field fails? The concept was so foreign to Federation engineering principles that Zexthara initially struggled to understand what Jake was proposing. Traditional antimatter containment relied on a single, perfectly calibrated magnetic field that completely isolated the antimatter from any contact with normal matter. The idea of using multiple independent fields seemed unnecessarily complex and potentially dangerous. But as Jake began explaining his reasoning, Zexthara realized the human was thinking about the problem from a completely different perspective. Instead of trying to create perfect isolation, Jake was designing a system that could tolerate imperfection while maintaining safety through redundancy. "Look at this," Jake said, sketching diagrams on a piece of metal with a welding tool he had found in the ship's emergency supplies. "If we create 6 smaller containment fields arranged in a geometric pattern, each one only needs to be 60% effective. Even if 2 or 3 of them fail, the remaining fields can still maintain containment long enough to repair or replace the failed units." The mathematics of Jake's proposal were actually sound, Zexthara realized with growing excitement. Multiple overlapping fields would indeed provide the kind of safety margin that traditional systems lacked. More importantly, such a system could be built using components that were already available on the ship. The power requirements would be enormous, Zexthara pointed out. 6 independent field generators would consume more energy than the ship's current power systems can provide. Jake grinned, an expression that Zexthara was beginning to recognize as indicating that the human had already solved whatever problem was being discussed. "Not if we use pulse generation instead of continuous fields. We alternate the fields in sequence, so that at any given moment only 2 or 3 are active, but the switching happens so fast that the antimatter never has time to move toward the containment walls." The elegance of this solution struck Zexthara like a physical blow. Jake had just described a containment system that was not only more reliable than traditional Federation technology, but actually more efficient in terms of power consumption. The rapid field switching would create a kind of magnetic juggling effect that kept the antimatter suspended without requiring constant maximum power. Such rapid switching would require control systems capable of nanosecond timing precision, Zexthara said. The coordination between multiple field generators would need to be perfect, where the switching gaps could allow antimatter escape. "Already thought of that," Jake replied, pointing to another section of his improvised schematic. "We use the ship's AI to handle the timing coordination. It's fast enough to manage the switching, and it can monitor all 6 fields simultaneously to detect any problems before they become dangerous." The human had just proposed integrating the very AI system he had recently optimized into a critical safety system that would protect millions of lives. The level of trust Jake placed in his own work was both impressive and slightly terrifying. Over the next several hours, Jake worked with an intensity that amazed Zextara. The humans seemed to require minimal rest or sustenance, focusing completely on the task of building his revolutionary containment system. He salvaged components from throughout the ship, modifying and combining them in ways that should have been impossible. The work required not just technical knowledge, but creative problem-solving abilities that went far beyond anything Zextara had previously witnessed. Jake would encounter obstacles that seemed insurmountable, pause for a few minutes of thought, then develop solutions that were both elegant and effective. "The field generators are ready," Jake announced, wiping sweat from his forehead as he completed the final connections. "The AI has been programmed with the switching sequences, and I've built in multiple safety protocols that will shut down the entire system if anything goes wrong." Zextara examined the completed work, his scientific training allowing him to appreciate the sophistication of Jake's engineering. The human had essentially reinvented antimatter containment technology from first principles, creating a system that was arguably superior to anything in the Federation's current arsenal. "The theoretical foundations are sound," Zextara admitted, "but the transition from the current failing system to your new design will require shutting down antimatter containment for approximately 30 seconds while we switch systems." 30 seconds with no containment field at all, Jake said thoughtfully. "That's definitely the scary part. If anything goes wrong during the transition, we won't get a chance to fix it." For the first time since they had begun working together, Jake seemed genuinely nervous about the risks involved. This actually reassured Zextara somewhat. Reckless overconfidence would have been far more concerning than healthy caution. "We could evacuate the surrounding area," Zextara suggested. "My ship's communication systems are still partially functional. We could warn your authorities to begin emergency evacuation procedures." Jake shook his head. "Moving 500,000 people would take days, and you said the current containment system is getting worse by the hour. We don't have time for evacuation. Besides, this will work. I'm sure of it." The confidence in Jake's voice was absolute, backed by hours of careful calculation and meticulous preparation. Zextara found himself trusting the human's judgment in a way that defied all logic and protocol. "Very well," Zextara said formally. "We will proceed with your plan. But I want you to understand that if we succeed, you will have accomplished something that will change galactic understanding of human capabilities forever. And if we fail, we won't fail," Jake said simply. "But if we do, at least we'll go out trying to save people instead of just standing around waiting for disaster." The transition process was the most terrifying 30 seconds of Zextara's life. As the old containment field collapsed, alarms screamed throughout the ship while the antimatter began moving toward the chamber walls. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed as though Jake's new system wasn't responding quickly enough. Then, the first of the new field generators activated, followed by the others in rapid succession. The antimatter froze in mid-motion, trapped by the overlapping magnetic fields that switched on and off in perfect coordination. The AI's voice filled the chamber, confirming successful activation and optimal performance parameters. "Containment stable," the AI reported. "All safety protocols active. Antimatter isolation complete. Estimated operational lifetime indefinite, assuming normal maintenance schedules." Jake slumped against a wall, exhaustion finally overtaking the adrenaline that had sustained him through hours of intensive work. "Well, that was fun," he said with a tired grin. "What's next?" Zextara looked at this remarkable human teenager who had just prevented a catastrophe that could have killed hundreds of thousands of people, and realized that his entire understanding of the universe had changed. Jake Morrison wasn't just an unusually clever member of a primitive species. He was a genius whose capabilities matched or exceeded the best minds in galactic civilization. "What's next?" Zextara said slowly, "is that I need to contact the Federation and inform them that humanity is ready for contact much sooner than anyone anticipated. Your species possesses capabilities that we didn't know existed." Jake looked surprised. "Really? I mean, I'm pretty good with fixing things, but I'm sure there are lots of humans who could have figured this stuff out." We're actually pretty clever when we put our minds to it. The casual way Jake dismissed his own extraordinary achievements as typical human behavior suggested possibilities that made Zextara's head spin. If this teenager was representative of human potential, then Earth's inhabitants might prove to be one of the most valuable species in the galaxy. Jake Morrison, Zextara said formally, on behalf of the Galactic Trade Federation, I offer you a position as Chief Technical Consultant for Human Federation Relations. Your insights into creative engineering and system integration could revolutionize technology throughout the galaxy. Jake considered this offer seriously for several minutes before responding. That sounds pretty cool, but I want to finish high school first. And I want to make sure other humans get the same opportunities. We work better as a team anyway. The idea that Jake viewed completing his primitive education as more important than immediate galactic recognition demonstrated a maturity that impressed Zextara even more than his technical abilities. This human understood that individual achievement meant nothing without the context of community and continued growth. Of course, Zextara agreed. The Federation will wait. But when you're ready, the galaxy will be eager to learn from humanity's unique perspective on solving impossible problems. As they emerged from the ship, the crowd of human observers erupted in cheers and applause. News crews had arrived, along with what appeared to be military and scientific personnel. Jake waved casually at the crowd, apparently unaware that he had just begun a new chapter in human history. One more thing, Jake said as they watched the sunset paint the Nevada desert in brilliant colors. When your people start talking to our governments about contact and trade and all that stuff, make sure they remember that we're not just clever with machines. We're also pretty good at figuring out how to get along with each other, even when we're really different. Zextara looked down at his young human friend and realized that Jake had just given him the most important lesson of all. Technical brilliance was impressive, but the ability to build bridges between different cultures and species was the true measure of galactic citizenship. In the years that followed, historians would mark the day that Jake Morrison repaired the quantum echo as the beginning of humanity's rise to prominence among the stars. But for Zextara, it would always be remembered as the day he learned that intelligence comes in many forms, and that the universe's greatest treasures are often found in the most unexpected places.